Does following religion mean abandoning science? Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins showed me and countless others the scientific witlessness that often accompanies religious belief.
Yeah, about evolution. Evolution is that human evolved from apes and stuff. But if there are still apes here, then how did human evolve from apes?
This is the commonest question I ever get. What's the answer of your science teacher to that?
We'll revisit how Dawkins responds later. But despite my commitment to rationality, they didn't personally convince me to abandon Islam. And I thought, this is a debating and critical thinking channel, so why not make a video about unpacking my 5 reasons why? Now, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind, but I hope this will be a thought-provoking video. Let's jump in. The limits of the scientific method. Rejecting evolution is clearly stupid, but assuming science will eventually refute all religious ideas is a hasty generalization. Science thrives on falsifiable knowledge, that which is testable. It's silent on whether the very goals we have are good in themselves, and how we should weigh competing values. Religious claims defy experimentation. No dataset exists, no measurement tool is capable, no control condition is there for an experiment. Without a provable test, how can anyone discount the possibility religion is true? And in science, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. This untestability makes me nervous that Dawkins and Hitchens could be wrong, despite their eloquence. And although they'd relish telling God he never gave them enough evidence to believe, I can't help feel that that argument won't wash with God himself. Now, while Sam Harris is trying to ground moral values in empirical reason, I still think this will only explain the how, and not the whys or shoulds of morality. It's cool that we can show how parts of the brain light up with moral action, or that we can agree that certain things increase happiness, but that doesn't mean those things are moral in themselves. The other problem is that there's no way to fully satisfy the skeptic with evidence alone. The Quran itself offers up this thought experiment, and even if we opened unto them a gate of heaven and they kept mounting through it, yet they would say, "Our eyes have been dazzled, nay, we are a people bewitched." Dawkins admits this himself.
What would it take for you to believe in God?
Well, I'm starting to think nothing would.
There's a parallel with anti-vaxxers or flat earthers here. All humans are prone to a denial response regardless of evidence, and I don't want to make that mistake about something as important as God. To me, it seems believing is much less about how much evidence there is, and more about whether we accept religion as it stands. Let's use a health example. In the pandemic, authorities embraced the precautionary principle that a lack of proof shouldn't prevent us taking sensible actions to prevent spread. And in many medical studies, scientists literally set a 5% statistical chance of error by pure convention. If the threshold is met, you say you have proof. If not, you say nothing to see here. Now, Dawkins' absolute skepticism is essentially a strategy for avoiding false positive errors, but it's not the same as absolute truth. And this strategy makes false negative errors more likely. For me, I want to avoid the danger of wrongly disbelieving in God instead, which brings us on to whether religious claims are even plausible. Causality may not be what we think. Watch Richard Dawkins' tactic against Mehdi Hassan here.
I mean, do you actually believe in your Muslim faith? Do you believe that Muhammad split the moon in two? Do you believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, for example? I'd pay you the compliment of assuming that you don't.
No, I do. I believe in miracles.
You believe that?
Yes.
The trap is beautifully set. If Mehdi disowns the religious claim, he's accepting religion conflicts with science. If he doesn't, he looks like he's embracing the supernatural. If he deflects, he looks shifty. But there's a few counter-arguments here that actually hold water. First, why do we resist the idea of a divine being who could interrupt the determinism of natural laws when we're so ready to accept scientific ideas that do the same? Quantum mechanics, the many worlds theory, or even that we could live in a computer simulation. Second, the Muslim thinker Al-Ghazali reconciled causality and religion using his idea of occasionalism. Essentially, he argued that all causality, in every moment, is held up by God's direct action. In other words, you might throw a rock at a window, but it is God that breaks the glass. Centuries later, the atheist philosopher David Hume identified the problem of induction, that rationally, we can never assume cause and effect are always linked, but we can only become more confident of this over repeated observation. If Hume and Ghazali are right, then we can't be certain that natural laws can never be broken, even though they reliably hold in everyday life. If God chose for the glass window not to break, clearly he could, just as a computer simulation could break certain rules. Now, I'd concede that I'd have no reason to believe that without religion. But while it's funny to watch Hitchens and Dawkins break religious people with their superior understanding of science, none of that is relevant to my thinking about God. All that I can say is that occasionalism and the problem of induction mean that we can't infer from religious miracles that all of religion must be nonsense. I don't have to disbelieve other religions completely. Hitchens wittily notes that monotheists are just one god short of atheism, and it's a point that I find pretty powerful, but I'm not completely convinced, because he never really addresses the alternative Islamic position. Hitchens cites creation myths, and he infers that the similarities between Islam and Judaism are plagiarism, and that the inconsistencies between religions suggest they're made up. However, Islam argues that there's a constant unifying message through all the prophets, from Moses to Jesus to Muhammad. It follows that the similarities could actually be a convergent truth behind the myths, with subsequent embellishment being responsible for the inconsistencies. In other words, that similarity might be a feature rather than a bug, and that's a problem for Hitchens' argument. The historicity of the Abrahamic faith seems to support that view. The earliest non-Muslim sources tell us that Muslims came to Jerusalem preaching about the God of Abraham. Personally, I find that unity compelling because it means that we don't have to choose between Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, but could be pragmatic about the inconsistencies brought into religion throughout history. That seems like a more rational position than what Hitchens does, which is dismissing all religions casually as invented. But this begs the question, can we have morality without religion? Hitchens' argument is straightforward. Many atheists are good, and many believers bad. And are you even good if you're just scared of divine punishment? There's a contradiction here. On the one hand, he's saying good actions should be motivated by complete selflessness. On the other hand, a secular framework for society might equally depend on social judgment and the fear of legal consequences to motivate ethical behaviour. The Black Mirror episode Nosedive explores the unintended consequences of such a system. In other words, Hitchens is merely replacing one form of external motivation, divine judgment, with another one, social judgment. But as a religious person, at least mine applies even when no one is watching. And the Quran offers another perspective on the question, that good and evil is put into every human soul, but cultivating good requires religious practice to counteract the pull of the ego. That's quite different from the folky trait of being generally a good person, doing nice things like putting your neighbour's bins out when you feel like it.
And you help your landlady carry out her garbage.
Without religion, we are like a climbing plant without a trellis, and more vulnerable to self-damaging behaviours. Hitchens' observation that religious people can do bad things doesn't weaken that argument, because the Quran actually warns against equating Muslimness with goodness. Instead, what religious rituals should do is enhance and guide that moral development. So imagine a powerful person motivated purely by self-interest. Someone like Boris Johnson, perhaps, who doesn't accept your morality, your laws, or even basic decency. An atheist has no compelling argument to offer against that materialism. If we make the rules, why can't we bend them when we see fit? In the absence of God or a final reckoning, such people are incentivized to do as much as they can get away with. From this perspective, replacing divine rules with our own elevates us to a supreme moral position, the very act which leads us to cross ethical boundaries. A certain kind of religiosity certainly allows people to do that too, but only insofar as they misunderstand religion, which brings us on to point number 5. Religion condemns religious misinterpretation. Hitchens is at his best when interpreting religion as an evil god, making good people do bad things.
I was told to do what all monotheists are told to do, and admire the man who said, yes, I'll gut my kid to show my love of God, I'd say, no, f*** you.
But my interpretation of religion is entirely different. So who's right? Hitchens says, the question is in some ways ultimately undecidable. But I disagree. The Quran devotes much space to warn against misinterpretations and cherry picking. To me, it seems what Hitchens is really criticising is those misinterpretations, without acknowledging they're disingenuous. Of course there are legitimate debates about interpretations, but that's different from saying that all opinions have an equally strong link to the text. It's obvious to me that Muslims who justify suicide bombing, for example, have to irrationally dismiss everything the Quran says about wrongful killing to reach their conclusions. This brings us back to Dawkins and evolution.
It's not that we've evolved from chimpanzees. Chimpanzees and we have evolved from a shared ancestor who lived about 6 million years ago and who was neither a human nor a chimpanzee.
The religious ignorance is shocking, but it's their ignorance, not present in the message. What we should do is take Dawkins' advice.
If you pardon me for offering advice at me, you are never going to win the fight against evolution. It is a fact. What you should do is to look at the Quran and reconcile it with evolution, which is what the Christians have done.
So what would religion look like if we did that and took a critical thinking approach to scripture? I can't speak for the Bible or the Torah, but the Quran seems impressively absent of nonsensical claims, given the lack of scientific literacy at the time. On the other hand, Quranic descriptions of nature are clearly compatible with evolution, so let's keep them and see evolution as a divine mechanism. The winged horse, that's not in the text, so Mehdi Hassan doesn't even need to believe in that, or any other non-textual superstitions that mainstream Muslims might have. So where does this leave us? I've learned loads from Dawkins and Hitchens debating the worst kinds of religious idiots, but I'm still not convinced God isn't real. Rather than make me into an atheist, they've made me a more scientific believer. I share their concerns about the dangers of religious ignorance, but I reckon the answer isn't less religion, but more religion. Religion reconciled with critical thinking and science. Let me know what you think below, and I'll see you in the next video.